Okay, so I think the best way to illustrate how all this works in action is just to go on an imaginary little sailing trip in the living room here. So I'm going to start by just showing you what I've got in the boat right now. I've got a single paddle canoe blade right in front of me here. This really helps for quick maneuvering strokes while I'm sailing. I've got my main sail and I've got a spare sail that's a different size so I can select for different wind conditions. I've got my regular kayak paddle behind me off to the left-hand side right here, and I've got a bilge pump off to my right-hand side right here, and I've also got a little day bag with me, and I'm showing you all this because I think it's important to actually show you how this is in real life instead of just a naked canoe that looks really simple. So my day bag has a sweater, my water bottle, my food in it, my phone, stuff like that. And I usually just clip this right here onto a wire gate carabiner. And this is really super easy to take on and off, and it sits right in my lap so everything's right where I need it to be. And then of course I have my PFD. Favorite PFD in the world is the Kokatat Misfit Tour. And just like all PFDs, if it is not uncomfortably tight right around your waist, it's not going to do its job. So make sure you're always really tight on the waist strap. All right, so we are in the water and we are ready to go sailing. I'm going to imagine that I have a nice breeze blowing across here. Maybe it's blowing 10 to 15 miles an hour, which is a lot of breeze, you know, for something like this. I think 15 is kind of the tops because that's when you start to see a lot of white caps that could actually swamp the canoe. So if it gets over 15 miles per hour, you probably shouldn't be out in a boat like this. But for this particular wind condition, I'm going to select the small sail. So I'm going to put that one up first. Just going to go ahead and unbungee cord it right here. You notice that everything in here is tied down and it's really well organized. And that is super important for any type of small boating because especially in small boat sailing, the ability to put your hand on something exactly when you need it and where you need it can often be the difference between being able to stop an unsafe situation from continuing or end up in the water. So important to stay really well organized. So I'm going to unbungee my sail here. I'm going to grab the halyard. I'm going to grab the sheet, and we are sailing. Go ahead and put this in the jam cleat here. And so the first thing you need to know is that this has two basic modes. And one is weight shift mode, where I'm just using the actual lateral resistance of the canoe and shifting the weight of my body to steer. And the other one is using the tiller slash rudder slash leeboard arrangement to actually balance the canoe. And so far of the two, I like the weight shift one the most because it's the simplest and it means I have to bring the least amount of stuff and I have the least amount of stuff to pay attention to while I'm sailing. So that's what I'm doing mostly, but I'm going to show you how to do it both ways. So first thing, I'll just go ahead and cleat this off over here. Cleating the sheet is a huge no-no in small boat sailing because that's how you end up in the water. If you get a gust of wind, you can't release the sheet, you end up in the water. However, in this particular situation, the sheeting angle that I've got into this cleat here is so acute that even a little puff ends up popping the sheet. So this is really nice because it allows me to sail hands-free but not end up unsafe or potentially tipping over. So that just explains why I did that, but why you normally wouldn't. All right, so the tiller arrangement here, there's a couple different ways to do this. Now you can see my backrest here. I've had to be really, really careful not to have too many parts in the canoe. So instead of just having a backrest and then a tiller rest or a bracket for the tiller in the back and then a leeboard bracket, I've decided to just go ahead and have one thing only and have it be all those different things. Now the only disadvantage to this is that if you're running downwind, you've got to stop, get out of the canoe, and bungee this thing in the very back of the canoe, which is kind of tricky to do on the water. But usually if you're using a canoe like this, you're probably pretty near shore anyways. If you wanted to just make a second separate piece of wood and have it sit permanently in the back, you know, that would solve this problem altogether. It's just, I'm really a super duper minimalist, and so I like to do with very little stuff. So this backrest here, I'm just gonna unbungee it. And I'm not gonna do it, but I'm gonna show you what I would do. I would go to shore and I would bungee this in the very back of the canoe like this. And then I would get my tiller here and like this, and I'm not going to leave it down because unfortunately I don't have water right here, I just have a floor, but pretend that it's down. And then you can put it right into the hole in this bracket back here, which is also the backrest, and now you can run downwind and steer. And this is one of the reasons that I decided to at least experiment with foil-shaped rudders for this, because you can get a lot more steerage out of a foil with less actual sweep on the tiller, and that's good because there's not a whole lot of room in here. And this kind of brings an important point, which is what happens if this isn't lined up perfectly here? Meaning, what if your hand isn't in the position you want it to be because that hole back there isn't perfectly lined up with where this needs to be to turn the way you need to turn? Well, there's a couple different solutions. You can drill a bunch of holes in that bracket back there like I did, and you can just move it. Or you can just reach back like this, and you can push it a little bit, and it'll slide sideways in the bungees, and you can kind of micro adjust where you want it to be. Now, the other cool thing about this is that if you want to take your hand off the tiller, it's super duper easy just to grab one of these little bungee cords right here, loop it around the tiller, and now your hand's free for a second while you do what you need to do. So really cool versatility there. So the other use for the tiller arrangement is you can bring it forward of you like this, and you can bungee it down, and you can only reach so far from a sitting position in the canoe without having to move. So it's really important that this ends up actually being in a usable location. And you can bungee this down right in front of you right here. And same thing on the other side. Like so. And this is super cool. All you'd have to do at this point is reverse this rudder here. If it's just a flat plate that you're using, you wouldn't even have to do that. And you can set this right in here. And now you have a lee board that is exactly where it needs to be to at least balance this particular size of sail. And that'll help you resist slipping sideways in the canoe. But of course, it's going to increase the drag because you have more crap down in the water. So it's kind of neat because this is really easy to adjust, and the combination between being able to switch sails and move the center of lateral resistance this way just gives you tons of options to play with. And it's a really good way to get to know sailing, and just a good way to get to know the wind in a really tiny minimalist context. And you don't even have to have your hand on this right here, because you can take that same bungee cord that's right here, loop it around, and now this can't move. Furthermore, if you want to experiment with different toe angles on the tiller, all you have to do is move this sideways or out a little bit, and you can play with that. So tons of versatility there, very cool. So that's actually using this tiller slash lee board slash foil slash flat plate slash whatever you want it to be system. But the cool thing about this little canoe is that it steers awesome just by shifting your body weight alone and just using the actual canoe itself as the lateral resistance to stop slipping sideways in the water. And it's really interesting because this might change as I get more efficient foils and more efficient sail sections, but so far I'm not seeing how there's a huge advantage to having a tiller or a lee board, because without the drag of these things, the boat goes faster. And even though you're sliding sideways more, you're making up for that with the increased speed. So there's not really much of an advantage course over ground to having this extra complexity. So we're just gonna go ahead and get rid of the tiller, and I'll show you how I do this just with weight shift. So let's get this thing out of here and set it out of the way. And now we're just hanging out in the canoe, and I'm sitting right here. The wind is right here, and I am balanced perfectly on a beam reach, and I'm heading across the wind. Now, if I want to head up into the wind a little bit, and of course you can't go very far into the wind with a canoe with no, sailboat shape to it and pretty much a flat cut sprit sail. But you can get in there a little bit. And so if I want to lean forward slightly, it'll change the balance of the canoe. The front of the canoe will bite in a little bit more, and we'll head up until the sail starts to stall. Now, normally in that kind of situation, you'd lean way back and fall off the wind a little bit, but it takes time for the canoe to shift its balance if you're using weight shift that way. So there's actually ways you can tease a little bit more performance out of this, and that is if there was a strong gust and the canoe is coming up and it's starting to stall a little bit, all you got to do is just grab this sheet here and give it a little yank to center. At the same time, lean back just a little bit, and really quickly it'll pull the canoe about 4 or 5 degrees off the wind and get you right back into the sweet spot so you can keep reaching without having to stall out and then fall way off the wind to get way going again. So that's really cool, and I've really just been enjoying in general the ability to which I can change the sail shape on this just by actually changing the sheeting position of my hand up or down or in or out. And you know, I can appreciably flatten the sail for higher gusts, or I can let it slack off a little bit, get a tiny little bit more of a belly in it so it does a little bit better in lower wind. Keep in mind, this is all super low performance sailing. We're not talking about anything really high speed or anything really fancy, but it does work that way, which is really neat. And I should mention before I go on that I actually brought a couple of commercial brand small kayak sails out on the water to test as well. And I was really interested to note that I not only did not see a performance difference, but I felt like these actually pulled a little bit stronger. And I don't know why that is, but it seemed like a fortunate accident, so I'll take it because these things were dead simple to build. All right, so I'm heading across the wind and I'm sailing, I'm happy. You're probably wondering about the healing moment right now because, you know, the first concern about being in such a small watercraft is what if a wind gust comes? Am I just going to tip right over? And that was a big concern of mine as well, but surprisingly, it didn't end up being a big deal, not just for me, and I have a lot of experience, but for my girlfriend as well, who has no small boat sailing experience at all. We were both able to manage kind of a moderate sail size for this thing, which is about, you know, 1 square meter or so. And I love that I can have 2 different sails on this thing. So if the wind is really light in the 5 to 10 mile per hour range, I can put about 1.5 meters to 2 meters on it. And if it gets a little bit gusty, then I can put the 1 or 3/4 square meter on there. And it just seems really balanced to the different wind conditions. Or if it's really light air, but you don't even want to think about your sail and you're just kind of don't want to be focused on sailing, you could put up the smaller sail, and that's a good solution for that as well. So really cool to have 2 different sails, and also really, really cool to be able to switch them out on the water. And I'm going to show you how that goes right now. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this cross member here because it's not super useful in this context. All right, so I'm tired of this sail. The wind is getting too much. This is the smaller sail. We're going to go ahead and put on the bigger sail. So go ahead and pop the halyard here, bring it down into the canoe, put the halyard back. I'm going to slide this sail off the mast like this. And keeping with the theme of keeping everything really well organized, I'm going to put this back. I'm not just going to let it sit loose in the boat where it's going to cause a problem. And I'm going to go over to the other sail. I'm going to unbungee it. And I'm going to slide it onto the mast here. Open it up. Slide it on the mast. Make sure I've got the sheet here. And we're going to go ahead and pop this sail up now. There you go. 30-second changeover to a completely different sail. I've got my bigger sail here, and now I am sailing with either more force or the same amount of force with less wind, and going across the wind. Now I want to go ahead and run straight downwind. Now normally what you'd do is you'd crank your tiller around, you'd point the boat downwind, you'd sheet this thing way out, and you'd just blow straight downwind. But in this case we don't have a tiller anymore, so what we're going to do is shift our body weight. Now this is kind of funny actually. It looks a little bit silly, but it works beautiful. And you could actually just move your body physically further back, but what I've been doing is whenever I want to run downwind, I just lean back like this, and it digs the stern of the canoe in, and the boat goes perfectly downwind. And then how I steer it downwind, because if you're a sailor, you know it's not going to last in that condition for very long before it veers off one way or the other, is I actually tug the sheet to get it to go one way to catch more wind, Or if it's going too much that way, you can do something you should never do in a larger boat, which is let the sail go ahead of the mast. And what that does in a bigger boat is it causes lift suddenly in one direction, which can cause the boat to dramatically roll that way. And it's just not a real safe thing to do. But in a boat this size, because you can balance it with your body, that little bit of lift that goes this way, you can actually just keep under control really easily, and it can actually pull the bow around a little bit. And it's super fun to just gently play the sail like that and get used to steering with just the sheet and also just your body weight. So really, really cool to be able to use it that way. So overall, you know, I would have to say that things are pretty promising. I was pretty frustrated earlier in the week, and I've been building so many parts, but eventually we kind of narrow in onto something that works. I'm really anticipating this sailing performance getting a lot better because, like I said in earlier videos, the shape of these first two prototypes is a little bit full at the ends, and that doesn't really help with the paddling. They're a little bit too maneuverable, and they don't have good lateral resistance through the water. So as soon as I get some new oak cut up and I can make a couple more of these prototypes, they're going to get a lot finer in the ends, which is going to allow them to sit down lower in the water, and they're going to have a lot better bite on the water, a lot more lateral resistance. And that's more than just a linear advantage. It doesn't just mean that you're going to go 10% better because you have 10% more lateral resistance, because the more lateral resistance that you have within reason, the more of the sail's force is going to be transferred into forward motion, which is going to increase the sail's apparent wind, which is going to increase its efficiency as well, which is also going to slide the boat forward faster into harder water that's going to resist it even more. And so, I mean, I don't think this is ever going to be an amazing sailing little boat, but I think there's a ton of room for improvement over what I have right now, both in terms of sail design and also in kind of making the canoe a little bit better for this without compromising its ability as just a general paddling canoe. So really excited about where we're at so far. Still very early stages with this. I imagine this is going to evolve a lot over the next months and years, but there's enough here to say that this is promising as a concept to have just a really light, really simple little ultralight pack canoe with a very functional, safe crosswind / downwind sail. So that's where we're at, and I have probably talked for long enough, so I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.